Very good afternoon to you, and
Good
welcome to
afternoon.
this channel on Akadru, where we connect people who have dialed into interesting careers and bring them to our audiences at Akadru and talk about them as to how their journey has been, talk about understanding what kind of skills and processes are required to become that kind of a careerist. Uh, to everyone, Vijay is with us today, and it's nice to have him on board in this conversation. He's going to talk to us about urban farming. He himself is an urban farmer and been one for a while. What not a lot of people know though is that he's a trained chartered accountant and ran a bunch of asset management and investment banking jobs before he kind of started off on his journey to become an urban farmer. Welcome, Vijay. It's great to have you on board, and I'm excited to learn about your journey and share your learnings with the audiences at Akatsu.
Oh, my pleasure, Abhishek.
So, I think first things first, tell us about your journey as to how it panned out, how you became an urban farmer, what is it that you do, and what did you learn along the way?
Sure. So basically, as Abhishek pointed out, I'm a full-fledged chartered accountant and a company secretary. And prior to doing this, I spent around 18 years in asset management and investment banking. So in my last role, I was actually head of asset management for a company managing around uh, I think last count was $4.5 trillion, and directly I used to be responsible for $1.8 billion of assets, both listed, unlisted, private equity space, etc. So, what prompted me to come into leaving that and joining this? It has no correlation, coincidentally. So I decided to take a sabbatical and came back to India, and the idea was to uh, relax and get my process and mind together as to what I want to do next. And that's when I basically wanted to set up a small farm in the outskirts of Mumbai, so that I can experiment with something which was a passion for me. Because all throughout for around 14, 15 years, I was researching about hydroponics and experimenting in my own small way. So actually wanted to set up a small farm in the outskirts of Bombay. And that is when the challenges and the shortcomings in the sector, from an Indian perspective, came out. And then being from the private equity background, I started digging deeper as to what's happening in India and found out that we are, uh, I can't even use the word nascent. So we were the sector or the industry was practically non-existent, with no credible manufacturers, consultants, or people engaging in the sector. So that's when a long-term call was taken. I had to put on my investment banking hat and study the sector first, and came out with a plan as to how we can work for the benefit of the sector in the country, and also help a few clients actually enter the sector. So we started off with the manufacturing first, of the core equipment and the brick and mortar required for building a farm, so that we can start supplying that to others as well as use that captively for our farms. And then gradually expanded to the science behind it, because that's the most important part of urban farming. Because uh, it's nature in a way when you talk about now normal farming. So you sow a seed in the soil, and then it grows, then it fruits, and then you harvest it. So it sounds as simple as that. But when you talk about taking that and emulating, you're kind of, you have to recreate nature. And nature, as simple as it seems, is the most complicated thing. So that's the most important lesson that any urban farmer needs to learn, or any high-tech farmer needs to learn, that you're recreating nature. Not for once you should get into a concept that I'm gonna uh, break nature. You can never do that. You can recreate it, you can slightly bend it to your advantage, but you can never break it. So recreating that requires a lot of science. So uh, that is when we expanded into the biotech side of things. So Valence Arbor, which is basically the group entity, which we acquired basically, uh, is one of the oldest biotech entity in the country focused on plant science. So the entity is now, I think, 12 years old, has a group of medical biotechnologists and genetic biotechnologists who focus only on the hydroponic space. So got that into the portfolio, that the science behind the whole process, and then gradually expanded into building a market or the distribution side of things, which is again, I'll come to the distribution side of things later because that's again the most important factor that no one needs to understand when it comes to urban farming. So we got the distribution in place, and then one of the sectors which was very very unfortunate to see when we started out is the technology side of things, the agri tech for that matter. India happens to be the technology capital, the outsourcing capital of the world. With we have you know all forms of coders, both embedded, non-embedded, IoT, front end, you name it. I mean, we today, if you look at the overall student population, I think we'll have, and Abhishek would vouch that number. I'm just guesstimating it. Maybe around 20 to 25% of our student population today would aspire to become coders. So that's the country we are talking about, and we did not have a single company focused on agriculture technology. So that's when we seed funded Arowana Automation, and uh, you know, basically what Arowana does is it automates, it emulates a farm manager. So it does all the thinking through AI processes, and right from a simple mechanical process to AI, we employ everything in between. So you know, so that the farms which are being set up are being run exactly and compliant to the various parameters that it needs to emulate. So that's the nuts and bolts of what we do. And in terms of farms, we are the largest player, obviously, in the country today. Apart from that, we are the most integrated player globally. So right from urban Kisan down south to farming V2 in the north to aqua leaf, herbaceous co, fresh growers, salad growers. These are a lot of these indoor brands. I'm just throwing some names here. These are all our clients. So in terms of the overall market share, I think, though we don't have an exact number, but I think we are 80% plus in terms of market share in terms of the brands out there. And farming V2, the most prominent farming company in the country, happens to be again a portfolio company for us. So the spread for us, basically using this technology background or the manufacturing technology distribution background that we have, the spread is primarily across India today through
Right.
various brands.
So this is very, very interesting. I do see that you've spent a fair amount of time in the sector before you were able to build out these different companies in the integrated urban farming space. Uh, for our listeners and viewers, I think it would be good to understand, maybe from a layman's perspective, slightly as to what exactly is urban farming. I mean, I have heard so many synonymous terms, right? There's farming, there's indoor farming, there's aquaponics, there's hydroponics, and God knows how many others. So maybe if you
Right.
can explain this to us at least in a simple enough way as to what urban farming is, and that would be very, very helpful.
Sure. See, the term urban farming is a very confusing one. It's very broad based. But and again, the definition or the explanation that I've gonna put on the table now is my own interpretation of that term. So urban farming, to put it in a very simplistic way, is farming, you know, any produce in a not so conventional way. That is number one. Not so conventional way. That is, you're not digging earth and growing it, and you're doing it predominantly. That leads to a second part. You're doing that predominantly because you're growing stuff which cannot be grown normally in that soil or region, or you're growing it differently. And third, you are trying to achieve a purpose behind that, which can be A, fulfilling a particular need. For example, if I'm growing, say, a Batavia lettuce or a Mizuna, which is unheard of from an Indian perspective, and I'm growing it, say, in a rooftop of a skyscraper to cater to a Japanese restaurant which is there in that building, to put it very simply, practically, then I'm actually indulging in urban farming. So because why? I'm growing Mizuna, which is not grown conventionally. I'm growing it on top of a skyscraper or in a skyscraper, which is not conventional. I'm solving a need of supplying that to a Japanese restaurant, which is catering to general public. Which takes us to the fourth point. One of the purpose and the key purpose that you're trying to achieve, apart from saving resources and all things, that's a different story. You are minimizing the transit time of produce from the plant to the plate. So you are growing it more local. Urban farming, for example, if I'm growing something in Mumbai today and I'm supplying it to, say, an Ahmedabad, technically it should not be urban farming, right? Because the distance, it's not grown local.
So
So if you
urban
look at
farming by definition has to be
has to be
localized.
local, has to be local. It's not that we do supply, for example, produce from our Talegaon farm, which is stem water, which is again one of the largest polyhouse grower in the country, gets supplied to Delhi and Chennai for that matter. It's not that we don't do it. We do it, but from a definition perspective, from an urban farming definition perspective, one of the boxes that should be ticked, good to have, is it should be localized.
So this is making sense to me. Just want to have some follow up questions on a couple of terms that you used. You talked about being an integrated farmer in the urban farming context. What does that mean? That's my first question. And second, how is urban farming in India different from urban farming elsewhere? I mean, I've specifically heard of urban farming or vertical farming in very, very cold geographies in
Right.
US, some parts of Japan, Europe, and even Canada, where it's taking off in a very big way. So, how is that different from doing it in Delhi or Mumbai for that matter?
Sure. I think these two questions are the most important questions from the industry context also, Abhishek. So the first part, when I use the word integrated, so that is very specific to us, or as a manufacturer, or as a brand, or as a company, right? So if you look at some of the most prominent names in urban farming or vertical farming or indoor farming, whatever perspective, there are companies who do only one part of the whole equation. That is, they would either be manufacturing certain goods or they would be growing, themselves as a farm, or they would be a service provider, right? So, and that is the vertical that they focus in, and they would be integrating multiple inputs from various vendors, from various other third party, whatever that they source from, and they achieve the purpose for which they exist. When we say we are most integrated, or the key elements that are required for setting up a farm, that is all the specialized goods that go into urban farming, vertical farming, indoor farming, whatever term you want to use. We manufacture that ourselves under our own brand. And it's not even third party manufactured. We have our own factories manufacturing. And that too, we proudly do that in India. So
Very nice.
we don't have any imported components. It's all manufactured by us in India. So we are a manufacturer of all the equipment. Second part is basically the science behind it. So we are a licensed fertilizer manufacturer. So that means right from the nutrients, we don't do seeds. Seeds is something that because they're consumable, so we get it from various sources. So the nutrients, the agronomy, the decision making of various parameters in the growing process is done by our own agronomy. The automation systems, that is, there are multiple factors. To name a few most important factors that you control from an urban farming perspective is your temperature, your humidity, your carbon dioxide levels. The reason you do CO2 is that's a food, right? CO2 is plant food. Your electroconductivity levels, your pH levels. So these are the five things which any farm should control, and you can either do it manually or you can automate the whole process. So the automation equipment which goes into urban farming is basically something that that again we manufacture ourselves. These are all our internal manufacturing this thing. And of course we have these various brands. So we also have a distribution entity, integration and distribution of the produce called Urban Roots. So right from conceptualizing a farm to distributing that produce, everything that goes in between. So we kind of have our presence in all those individual areas. So that's what I mean by integrated, which again
Okay.
shows how complicated the sector is. I mean, agriculture is a very simple thing, right? You sow a seed and then it grows, you harvest it. It's as simple as that. But when you talk about urban farming and you talk about vertical farming, indoor farming, any of the high tech farming principles that you want to apply to it or terms you want to apply, it becomes complicated. So that is when you basically need to have this whole integration plugged in for you to successfully run that farm, get the produce out, quality produce out at the optimal price possible, and also sell it. That is where the distribution comes in at a profitable rate, so that putting on my old hat to achieve your ROIs and IRRs and other things. So all those parameters have. So that's what I meant by integrated.
Well
Now,
understood. Yeah.
the second part of the question, how is it different between, see, a colder environment or a developed environment versus doing it in India? So, the world's largest indoor farm, which is coming up in Canada, is being done by us. So, we know the dynamics there also, and we're also in the process of setting up something in the Eastern European region to face the same winter challenge. To put it in a very simple perspective, the key difference between doing these advanced farming techniques in a Canada or any of the colder developed countries versus in India, you're trying to solve a different need. Like
Hmm.
if I look at a Canadian perspective, uh, if I can grow lettuces, normal lettuces, at whatever pricing possible, it will get easily sold off during that 4 months of the year where it's practically frozen, right?
Right.
Because there's nothing else available. And no, specifically to Canada, it's a country which again suffers from the Dutch disease, like the Middle East. A lot of your produce is imported, right?
Hmm.
So during winters, the cost of mobilizing produce from anywhere else and the challenge of you not be able to grow anything in your locality means an indoor farm which is radiated, insulated, and heated, growing lettuces, you're trying to solve a need which is staple loading. Whereas if you look at a Delhi or anywhere in India, we are never, so we are blessed as a country. We are never deprived of staples, right? Like the
Never.
staples for an Indian household is your typical pyaj, tomato, and palak, and bhindi is available round the year. In India, we are trying to solve a different purpose to put the exotics into the dish. And if I look from a distribution perspective, a lot of our customers, and no, it's not that we don't do non-exotics. We do non-exotics also in India, in poly houses and other things. But specifically indoor urban farming, the client base is primarily guys who are very fitness oriented or want to experiment with continental dishes, or household which get that that Mexican, Italian, or a global cuisine fever twice a week or something of that sort. So
Right.
the target audience and the purpose, the need, which I always talk about in all
Hmm.
scheme of what we do is different. So in India, it's the ball game is to solve a different need. In a developing country, it's a different equation altogether. Second major differentiating factor is the cost of energy, which I think which anyone who has been through investment banking, economics as a subject understands. Energy is a determining factor for anything, right? So the cost of energy or cost of electricity, to put it more simply, plays a huge difference in this whole equation because you're climate controlling it. So your HVAC, and in India it's primarily AC. You're running it at, if you look at a place like Mumbai, you're gonna run it at $10 a unit. Whereas if you go to any developed country or colder countries especially, energy cost is usually lower. And instead of cooling, you're heating.
Right.
So the way your structure is built itself is actually contributing positively to what you want to achieve. Because if you put in, you know, um, a brick and mortar place, or you put a polyfilm or a glass house or whatever that you're putting in, it is basically naturally providing a radiation and an insulation, and you're only topping up more by providing the heat. But if you look at it from an Indian perspective, you put a poly house or you put a structure in, especially a poly house, without your ventilation systems, you can actually bake a pizza inside. It gets so hot, so it's kind of working negative. So these are just a couple of points which basically differentiates. And of course, your target audience. That's what the staples versus exotics discussion, which I told you. That is the most important aspect of how this method of farming works in the West versus how it works in India. And with all the rosy things and the good things I added, let me add a negative to it. This is one of the predominant reason or lack of this understanding is one of the predominantly cause for a lot of these newer farms which are coming up, and they go kaput. They don't understand these dynamics. They try to emulate the West, and not just clients. I'm talking about certain companies, project managers also, who would see things on the net, who would see things on YouTube, and try to emulate that, and it does not work.
This is very, very interesting. In fact, I know some of my friends who were trying to grow strawberries in warm Delhi weather, and I was wondering how would that be possible. And I think some of the things which you mentioned about a very short-sighted, maybe YouTube-driven view would have contributed to that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thoughts on understanding and learning. I mean, if you are a farmer, you would intuitively know how you have to farm, right? You would have seen it all around you. You would know how to grow crops, and I would suppose that when you grow up in rural India, you would have it in your blood. uh, if you're talking to, let's say, a 15-year-old or a 17-year-old who's thinking of urban farming as a potential career 10, 15 years down the line, what kind of skill sets do they need to inculcate, and how is it that they can go about acquiring those skills?
I'll answer that in two folds, Abhishek. So number one, my personal experience. Right, I
Absolutely,
can only
that's
talk
very,
about
very
I can
valuable.
only talk about what I know, the way I did it. So there are certain you know qualities which I think a 15, 17-year-old today needs to develop if he wants to walk down his path. And that applies, this number one applies for anything and everything that they want to do, not just this. Get into the habit of reading.
Mhm.
No, there are no. There's a particular author, Howard Rush, and maybe I'll send the link across to you. He has 4 books on hydroponics. I think anyone who wants to do anything in urban farming, vertical farming, advanced farming should read those 4 books to start with.
Okay.
Then continue your reading patterns, expanding that to various territories which can be light for that matter. though sixth standard, seventh standard, we always read about photosynthesis in our textbooks, but that's only the start. So
Right.
obviously, how light plays, how temperature plays a role, how CO2 plays a role. So reading, learning for me has never stopped. Even now, practically when we do things, I learn new things, right? So that is something. Number one is the reading, which has to be continuous. And second, you don't need to own a farm to experiment, right? No, I mean, I have experimented with, with growing stuff even at my windowsill. So you don't even need a balcony. That's a luxury. And I stay in Mumbai, so you can understand what I mean by that, right?
Right.
So I'm talking about a windowsill is more than enough for you to start your process. So it's a step-by-step process. Anyone who comes with a completely no background in farming, has never done farming, should ideally start off with a small flower pot. You can start off with knowing how a seed germinates. Again, sixth standard, seventh standard biology textbook, the botany side of the whole science thing. Start off with that. Slowly, once you get your handle on growing something on a pot, get understand the concept of growing, what aspect, like what does the soil do in that, what does the water moisture do in that, how's the light playing, how's the CO2 playing, migrate to us maybe a small kit of experiment. You don't need to buy anything. No need to buy anything at all. I never bought anything when I was experimenting. You can actually fill that same pot, without the hole in the bottom, with water, cut in a styrofoam top, and you know put in the plant with some media, coco peat or whatever. See what happens. Obviously, it will die off because there will be no O2 levels in the water. So you add a bubbler in. Then at that stage, you're gone to where you have grown a plant only with water. There will be shortcomings in that. Minimize the size, minimize the space, put more plants in. So that process is something that you can do in a windowsill. You don't need any high funda farms or anything of that sort. So that's something that anyone should start with. So basically, if someone spends even a few months in this experimentation, he's covering a lot of the spade work required. And then for our clients who are actually going doing commercial things, obviously they also come with a background of not ever doing farming. Like for example, Delhi Farming V2, he's one of the most popular farming company in the country today. The guy comes from an FRP manufacturing background. He has never even bothered to know what how a seed grows when before he started out. He went through a training process. So we have our agronomy teams which train our clients. So our first few cycles, and I know that's something even when we choose our clients, I know we are one of those guys who would refuse 8 out of 10 projects out there.
Oh,
So there are 10 projects which come to us and say, boss, we want you to look at it and we want you to execute it. We say no to 8 of them. And the reason we say no to those 8 is because we try to understand the drive behind the client or the logic behind the whole equation. It might be as simple as the location, it might be as simple as the market, it can be there are multiple facets, as I told you, right? But one of the aspects is what is the learning drive that the person has. So we have dedicated every time we do a farm, our agronomist spends 3 months on site on that farm, training and putting processes in place. And again, maybe because of the background, we have an SOP even for seeding. So there are standard operating procedures for every aspect of the farm. So even if a person today takes over the farm and he wants to run it, he gets manuals. He gets, I think now we have some 27 manuals or something. So there are various aspects. So everything that he encounters, he refers to a manual, and he knows what to do. And over and above that, all the farms are IoT based. So the agronomy team today gets in all the feed as to what is happening in that farm. All the parameters are on the cloud for us to access at any given point in time. So we know what is going on there from an ambient perspective, from a water perspective, from a temperature perspective. And we have high definition cameras, which we started from just We are in farm number 2 or 3 for high definition cameras, which are again IoT based. So our agronomy team can zoom in and see what is happening to that plant. So if there's some kind of an infection or a pest attack, we know exactly what to do. And the way a doctor prescribes a medicine, the agronomy team prescribes a medicine, and then it gets sprayed or added to the water or whatever that needs to be done, and it's taken care of.
Brilliant. And so, I mean, you were talking about the skills required, and I'm so glad that you talked about reading and then experimentation, because I think Akadru fundamentally is built upon this principle of learning itself. I mean,
Right.
when you want to learn about a particular concept, you read a lot, you watch a lot of videos, which is expand your horizons. You experiment subsequently, small projects, low commitment project, which allow you to kind of test your different hypotheses
Absolutely.
and start getting your hands dirty. And only when you're confident of this, you dial into and commit to long-term skill building projects, which often go on
Absolutely.
for many months, sometimes even years. And I think that to us at Akadru has been the process of building skills. Uh, and I think that is something which we can apply. But is there something more specific that you would like to recommend to learners of this craft, and what kind of new jobs they could expect to get ready for, let's say in 2030s or 2040s, if you were to take a punt into the future?
See, to be very frank with you, as I told you, the best process basically is reading and experimenting in a smaller scale. There is
Right.
no substitute for that. I mean, is there anything else apart from growing which will teach you farming? The answer is no. You have to grow, as simple as that. And in
Right.
terms of career opportunities which are opening up, you know, today we employ, we are in the, we are, I think in the next couple of years, we'll be the largest employer of BSc Agris.
Oh, is it?
We'll be taking our agronomist team base to roughly 60 to 70. The idea is to have or become the Infosys of farming for that matter, right? That's what we're doing. We're providing agronomy as a service, right? So
Right.
that's where we are heading. Frankly, on the biotech entity. So the agronomist role is will change, especially with the sector growing. So it's no more an agronomist. Today, what happens to an agronomist in a country today is, he works in the rural areas, and he works as a consultant or as an employee in a farm. And if he's working as a consultant, yes, you'll often find these agronomists who are, going around between farms, having a look and suggesting that whatever needs to be done. They specialize. Some of them specialize in grapes. Some of them specialize in wheat. Some of them whatever it may be. So that is changing. With this sector coming in, you need specialized agronomists uh, from a hydroponics perspective or from a polyhouse perspective, whatever vertical that there is, and they specialize in this, and they would not be running around. They may be situated in a farm. There are always agronomists working in a farm, but there are agronomists who are working for us who are actually working, like a software programmer in front of a system. So the role is changing, and other areas which are evolving. There's a lot of biotechnology and nanotechnology now. We are the collaborators with RCF, for RCF is Rashtriya Chemicals and Fertilizers, the largest mini Ratna fertilizer company. We are their R&D partner, and we are experimenting with nanotechnology in hydroponics.
Brilliant.
So,
So I think it looks like that there is a lot of scope,
oh
of
yeah,
course,
absolutely.
and I
The
think new roles
biotechnology
are
side, the nanotech,
evolving.
yes, absolutely. And then of course the packaging and the food sector. See, the food sector employs a lot of biotech guys these days, right?
Right.
So with with a sector like this coming in, if you look at say a Kagome for that matter, Kagome is a Japanese company which does crushed tomatoes, and they are the largest tomato players in the world, and they have a
Mhm.
presence in India also. Like someone like a Kagome is now coming up with crushed tomatoes which are Roma and mixed with cherry tomatoes with various blends, which are going to go to various restaurants so that they can use it for their pasta bases, etc., etc. Obviously, you have specialized biotechnologists required for that. You have specialized procurement guys for that, who are again agronomists. So there are multiple roles which are opening up in the sector.
Fantastic. So I think this is going to be a lot of action in the sector in the times
Yes,
to come.
absolutely.
Uh, Unfortunately, we are running out of time. In fact, we've overshot our time limit by 5 minutes.
Oh,
So
sorry about that.
no, it was an interesting conversation. Maybe we could do a follow up as well. And if you don't mind, I would share questions with you if our users send out
Please,
some. Uh, do send me
absolutely.
do send me the link to the book that you mentioned. That would be very very useful. We will post it on our Akadru page. And thank you so much, Vijay, for
My
joining
pleasure.
in. It was a lovely
My pleasure.
conversation, and we really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you. Look forward to it.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.